Hi, everyone.
Hi, Emily.
How are you guys doing today? Did you have you
Hello,
been having
everyone.
any flooding out there?
We've had minimal.
Okay, that's good. I've been thinking about you as I've been getting the reports from Providence.
Providence is awful. Cranston's awful.
Cranston's underwater.
Yeah. It's pretty much slowed down here.
That's good. And how about drought status? Because that's the other piece of this.
Yeah. The grass is getting greener.
As we speak, yeah. I sent out an email just a few minutes ago. It came to my attention that not everyone had received the agenda and the attachment that we'll be talking about today. So if folks have not seen that yet, be aware that in your inboxes is an email from me right now with some material for tonight. I will also be sharing my screen if you don't have access to your emails right now.
That's probably my fault because Emily, you and I haven't chatted, and I've been dealing with legal matters all day today. So
well, welcome out of that. Sorry,
yeah.
No worries, Herb.
So I apologize to the committee on that. So
all right, so it's 5 o'clock. We are recording. This is gonna, as we know, helps me with my record keeping and my note taking. I still would like to do sort of how we normally start these meetings, just with a roll call of who's here from the committee for the record. So I'm gonna try to run this from the way that everyone appears on my screen. And it starts, well, I'll start with myself, Emily Slotnick, Beta Group, project manager for Coventry's comprehensive plan update, and hand it up to Julie.
Julie Letty, Coventry Housing Authority.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sinakowitz from District 4.
Thank you. Ann?
Hi, Ann Dixon, District 1.
Great. Herb?
Herb Durfee, Director of Planning and Development. And then just, I know I'm guilty of it right now, but when you guys aren't talking, if you can mute yourself, it minimizes the feedback.
Thanks, Herb. Bob?
Bob Heavey, District 1.
Great. Tom?
Tom Pendergast, District 3, Vice President of the Upper Dam Pond Conservation Association.
Thank you. Lynn?
Lynn Carlson, District 5.
Thank you. Larry?
Larry Manier, District 1.
And Sherry?
Sherry Eldricken, District 1. I can't get my camera to work.
No worries. We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Yep. And I've got probably Cody on the background there as Town of Coventry IT, unless there's someone else that's participating that I'm not seeing. Okay.
Yeah, Cody he's co-hosting with me right now. Eventually he's going to go home, so he'll drop off and I'll take on hosting. Okay,
great. So next up on the agenda, just a review of where we're at timeline wise in the arc of this project. We've had our first 2 committee meetings. This is our 3rd advisory committee meeting here in early September. We have completed our first public meeting, and the next meeting that we all have scheduled together is in fact the 2nd public meeting. We're going to talk about that today. The goal of this 2nd public meeting has always been to discuss the overall goals actually of the comprehensive plan. So this is the next step in the planning process. After we've established what our existing conditions are and the needs and opportunities, we revisit the overarching visions and goals for the community in going forward into this plan, and the vision and goals set the framework for us to be talking about policies and actions. And so the second public meeting is an opportunity to bring some of the preliminary draft goal ideas that have been generated out of this first phase of our project, present them to members of the public who join us for the meeting, and get some feedback, do some brainstorming around what sounds good, what maybe is missing, and also whenever you have a conversation about goals, as I'm sure we'll experience tonight, you end up talking also about actions, whether you want to or not. So we get some other information, some other feedback from that meeting, even on the periphery of the real stated purpose. So that's the purpose of public meeting number 2. We have that currently scheduled for October 12th. So just a month away. It would be virtual. And I believe we do the same times that we did for the first public meeting. So that was 7 to 9, I believe. So that's all I need to say about that right now before moving on. Does anyone have questions about where we're at in the timeline? Herb?
Just on on the town webpage, it says public meeting number 2 is from 6 to 8 p.m. Do you?
Okay, then I stand corrected.
Is
I'm sure.
that okay? Okay, I'm just making sure, because otherwise we'll have to get it changed. So
Yeah,
okay.
no, that's good. I actually didn't have it written here, and I was guessing based on what I remembered the last one to be, but I must have confused it with a different plan. So
Okay.
6 to 8 p.m. That's great.
Just
And
a
then
quick
after-
question.
Yeah, go ahead, Sherry.
Sorry. And how are we notifying? I know it's on the website, but are you guys sending out a mailer? Are you doing anything like that too? Are they going to place an ad? How are we going to make sure the public knows that this is happening other than word of mouth?
Yeah, it's a great question. Herb, can you take that one?
Sure. What we tried to do last time, what we did do last time was we put it up on the town Facebook page. I actually ghost wrote an article for our area newspapers, of which none of the newspapers picked it up, which I was pretty disappointed in. But I'll probably do a similar thing to catch the hard press. I don't know if we have, I'm trying to think of our, we had the Public Works Department put their sandwich board or 2 out, and they moved it a couple times around town. There are probably some other things that we can do. But we did do our normal bulletin boards, that sort of thing. The part of the issue with the town is that we don't have a good social network or accounts of social networks like Twitter or those kinds of things. I'm used to communities that have like Front Porch Forum, if anybody's aware of that sort of thing, where you can post stuff, and we don't really have that. So it's been difficult to have digital related stuff. So it's been trying to rely, as Sherry said, there's been some word of mouth, sandwich board, Facebook, and our Facebook page is somewhat limited in terms of membership. Announced during various meetings, bulletin board, and I think that's what we did last time. If people have additional ideas, that would be great.
What about public service announcements through the radio stations?
We didn't do that, but I certainly can create something as a result of the ghostwriting that they might be able to use. And I'm trying, Anne might know, I can't remember who's the person that does the radio show, Anne. You got to unmute yourself. I know the bad thing about asking people to mute is that they don't unmute.
Well, all of the things that you're mentioning are things that we did for the past referendum vote. We use every single form of media. We do not know, because we never did exit interviews, what caught people's attention, but we did use the digital signs in 2 locations. We did have public service announcements. We had red alerts. People complained because they were coming out too late or too early in the morning or too many. But we did everything we could possibly think of. The only thing we did not do was use lawn signs, but everything else was done. So we blasted people with his information.
So so I could draft something with a PSA because we do apparently have some radio contacts that we can do.
We do, but the other thing, for the last referendum, I spoke with the manager and talked about all the things that the town could do. And then I went over and spoke to the superintendent of schools and I asked, what are all the things that the school can do to assist us in getting out the vote? So when we talk about this public hearing, we want to make sure we touch base with the superintendent of schools and ensure that he is using all of the social media and communication tools that he uses in order to get out the parents. Now, there's going to be a change in leadership. So as of October 1st, your contact person would be Don Cowart, because he's going to be moving up to superintendent, and Superintendent Levis will be moving down to assistant superintendent. So make sure you contact Mr. Cowart.
Lynn has her hand up.
Yeah, I was just curious if anybody uses or thinks about flyers or postcards in a mass mailing using the tax assessor database or the referendum database or whatever you guys have. I don't know if people read those or not, but that's just another thought of an idea.
For the referendum, we did send out mailer. We cannot basically ask people to support a budget. We can't use tax dollars to do that, but we can encourage people to come out and vote. But it does cost money to send out mailers.
I understand it costs money. But I mean, this is for the entire town. This is for our future and for the future of the town. And I think every taxpayer has a right to know that it's happening. So regardless if it costs us money or how we need to get the information out, I feel that the information needs to get out because it's been put out very poorly in the past. And I think that everybody has a right to get this information. So any way that we can do it, even if it costs taxpayers money, I think we need to do it. Because unfortunately, the biggest problem with this town is everyone will tell you is the communication. They don't know about it until it's too late.
I understand what you're saying, Sherry. Right now, there is no line item in the budget for this kind of communication. So we would have to find where we can get the money. So it might mean that something is taken out of some other budget in order to do this. But certainly having someone who will take the lead in developing the campaign, I call it a campaign, get out the vote, get out people to the public hearing is certainly very important. But a plan and with responsibilities, roles and responsibilities and timelines is extremely important. I think that's been the failing. There hasn't been really a plan. People talk about what should be done or what can be done, but there is not accountability for any of these tasks. So if we get a plan and we assign roles and responsibilities, I think we can be very successful.
I have to agree with you. I think assigning people to do things actually holds people accountable and makes sure that it actually happens. So I agree with you on that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Hey, this is, hello?
Yes, Bob and then Tom.
Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to raise my hand, but there's no button on this version of this wonderful system for raising hands. But Herb, if you did, or who's responsible for creating the flyer that will be put on a web page or on the town's Facebook page?
I would inevitably, I would be the one that would do that, and I'd bounce it back and forth off of Emily just to see if it's got the information that we have on that and get it out and stuff. So in addition to that, as I said, I would be the one that would ghostwrite any article or PSA or whatever. And then concurrently, I just wrote a note to myself to check the budget to see what there is or is not with regard to the ability to do this, and which may mean talking to the town manager about if there are some funds that we could find to do something like a mailer. But it is expensive. I'm used to, I've done that throughout my entire career, you know, like sticking a stuffer in the tax bills, that sort of thing, trying to save postage and all that. But I've also been in much smaller communities. So if you do these household bulk permit type things, they still can be pretty darn expensive, especially for a town of, what is it, 31,000.
Okay.
37.
If you get me the flyer as soon as possible, I've been very involved with other forms of social media, particularly Next Door Neighborhood, and particularly Western Coventry, which has almost a 50% enrollment after a lot of heavy marketing to get almost a 50% household enrollment. And I can get it posted to that site, as well as some of the other Coventry Facebook pages that I participate in, so I can figure out what's going on in this town. And so if you do that, I'll get it posted. I did that for meeting number 2, and it didn't seem to do a lot, but we'll try again.
Great.
Could I mention, not that we can do it, but I mapped all of the EDDM, the every door direct mail routes for Coventry, and the cost for sending something to every address in Coventry would be about $2,800 plus the cost of the mailer.
Thank you. Anne has her hand up.
Yes, I just want to mention that if you click on in the black area below the gallery view, you'll see an icon that says reactions. And if you click on reactions, you'll see a way to raise your hand.
Thanks, Anne. And Tom had his hand up as well.
Okay, sorry, couldn't find it.
Oh, see, I'll raise my hand.
There, oh, there you go.
I got you, Tom.
So a couple of things sort of on this topic. So in District 3, we have a very large town approved sign that we can hang stuff on. So if you want to give us something, happy to put it. It's on 2 sides and it's on the junction of Black Rock and Jervis Street. And it gets a lot of traffic. So we could do that. We also have a web page with over 200 participants on it, Facebook page, a group page. So we're happy to post that as well. And then the third thing I had is more of a question. Do you have a specific contact at the Coventry Courier? Because we use one person, she's very good, and I can send you that contact if you need it.
So great, please. For anybody that has these kinds of ideas, it's great hearing them, but also email me contacts or whatever, because that will help me in filtering stuff back to the appropriate person. That would be helpful to me.
Got it.
Thank you.
I've got Lisa and Lynn.
I'll just quickly say that I'd be happy to help design a flyer or a postcard or something, Herb, so that we can take that off your list of things to do if that's something that the folks would like me to take on.
All right, thank you.
That's
Herb,
fine by me.
I have access to the Tioga Lake Association mailing email list and be happy to put something out there. That's about 125 members. All of which are in District 4.
Okay, great. I had a question for Anne, who mentioned using the Code Red system, I believe. Do you know, Anne, how many Coventry residents are signed up for that?
Emily, what was your question?
So you mentioned for the get out the vote that you did, you used, I thought you said Blackboard or Code Red, one of these reverse 911.
I can't hear, I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Emily.
So she's talking about Code Red. Anne, how many, do you know how many
Code
accounts
Red,
we have?
I don't remember the number. We have people voluntarily sign up for Code Red. Some of them volunteer for a telephone call, some of them volunteer for an email, and some of them volunteer for both. But we can get that information. But it's actually smaller than you would think. You wouldn't rely on Code Red only as a way to communicate.
Okay. I'm gonna plug in here to see if that helps my volume.
Other thoughts, questions about outreach? All right, can folks hear me? Great. In that case, I'd like to move on and talk about the next thing on the agenda, some housekeeping, which is just sort of checking in on the status of the draft chapters that we've asked you all to review. I want to thank those who have sent us their comments. They've been very helpful, and we have turned those around for the first 4 chapters that we shared, which were the land use, transportation, housing, and open space and recreation, and incorporated comments, made revisions, and sent those along to statewide planning for their feedback. And again, you know, I've mentioned this a few times, but our process and sort of our rationale behind sending these first preliminary findings, the existing conditions drafts to statewide planning, is to not put the cart before the horse, if you will. We want to, the priority of this planning process is to come up with a plan that reflects the town of Coventry. The maybe second priority is to come up with a plan that is adoptable by the state, that meets the state requirements, so that it will be certified, and therefore the state will have to respect the findings of that plan. And in order to do that, we need to have all of these various state departments review and approve of the plan. And since this existing conditions needs and opportunities piece is really the foundation upon which we build the goals and the recommendations, it has become best practice in the state to get this in front of our state reviewers before we move on to the goals and policies and actions. So that's what we're doing. We've sent those first 4 in. They have 6 weeks to review. And so what that means is that they'll have those while we send in our next batch, which we will do as soon as we can turn around our revisions from the feedback that you all have given us. So next up would be cultural and historic, and services and utilities. On cultural and historic, we had just 2 reviewers send in comments, but they were significant. Norma sent in quite a lot of information for us and feedback, which is great. On services and utilities, which you've all seen at this point, and you all know, it's sort of the biggest chapter in the plan. It almost could be 4 chapters in and of itself. So it was a heavy one to review. We did get input from 4 reviewers on that one. The last 4 are energy, economic development, natural resources, natural hazards, and climate change. I wanted to point out that economic development, and I should say there have been comments that came in the last 2 or 3 days that I haven't seen yet. I haven't reviewed them, but until those, we had almost no comments on the energy chapter. We only had comments from Anne on economic development and natural resources. So again, I know that a few of you have sent in comments in the last few days, and hopefully you're talking about those 2 chapters as well. But I especially the one that really stood out to me, the 2 that stood out to me were the economic development and natural resources. Economic development being a really key component of this plan, and of the needs of this town. So we really want to make sure that we're getting everyone's opinions and getting our facts straight. Sherry, I see your hand up. I will get to you in just a second. And then natural resources, similarly, as being such a critical component of Coventry's identity. Again, we want to make sure that we're hitting the nail right on the head with that one. So Sherry, go ahead.
I did not receive them. I need those. I do not have those. I just went back in my email and double checked. I do not have those. I have the original ones that were sent the first set that we did.
So you got land use, transportation, housing, and open space and recreation, but none of the subsequent chapters?
Nope. I did not get it. I
Okay.
don't know if my, you are using my work email. I don't know if it got spammed. Can you use my Sherry? Oh, wait, let me write it out so I remember how it is. It's SHERRY for the number 4 district DISTRCTK 4@gmail.com. Can you use Sherry with the number 4 district number 1@gmail.com.
All right, Sherry for district1@gmail.com.
Yep.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
All right, and that'll just make sure that I get it. I'm wondering if my work email did something. I apologize.
Maybe it blocked them because of the attachments.
I think it did because I never even saw it. So I do apologize. And I did double check to make sure.
Okay, Bob?
Okay, now I'm off mute. I'm remiss in some of the early reviews. I did do the last 3 and got those out in the last 48 hours.
Great.
Is there any that, it looks like some are up with statewide planning, as you said. Are those
right.
too late to comment on, or those, it says you can comment through the public forum or send comments to Herb, but are the rest of them, are you still accepting comments for?
Yeah, and so all of these are going to be open for public comment once we do our internal committee review. When they go to the statewide planning, they're also going to be posted as drafts on the website, as the first 4 are. So if you miss those first 4 and you still want to give some feedback, you could do so through that avenue. But for the rest of them, we still, my priority is making sure that we get the comments that the committee wants to give before we wrap them up and send them to the state. Obviously, it is in our best interest to do that in a timely way. But if there are any, aside from those first 4, that you want to make sure that you hit before we get them to statewide planning, I'd say the window is still open.
And is there any in particular? I was trying to catch up with which ones were which.
I can tell
one-
you which ones, like I said, I haven't seen your comments that you did just send, but the chapters that we sent after those first 4 are cultural and historic, services and utilities, energy, economic development, natural resources, and natural hazards and climate change.
Okay, and you said one of those you only had 2 comments and 2 commenters, and you were kind of nervous about that or wanted more feedback.
Economic development and natural resources, yeah.
All right,
Both of
I'll pay
those.
attention to those first.
Great, thank you. Lisa?
Emily, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to sign off at 5:30, but I hoped to make some comments about natural resources.
Okay, great.
I'm looking at page 15 in the natural resources handout that you sent. And the last, from line 200 to 205, the town doesn't come close to doing enough on those various subjects in line 200 to 205, and those are all critical. The town needs to do far more than what they do. They do almost nothing on all those areas that are talked about in lines 200 to 205. They're critical to protect Coventry's water bodies.
Okay, I have that noted, and I'll put that into our overall comment matrix for our chapter authors. I'm not looking at that chapter right now, so I don't have the context, but I think everything you just said will give me enough to go on when we are looking at those lines.
And
It's essentially our water bodies and the quality of them, which is a hot button topic also for our Conservation Commission right now.
Mhm.
And as far as District 4 is concerned, in order to keep the water body that is in District 4 usable and clean, sewers are an absolute must. There's no getting around that anymore. The town's only public, well, I'm sorry, Tom, I shouldn't say this, the town's only public beach, but the public beach that is on Tioga is horribly mismanaged. It's not managed at all, actually. It's left wide open. And it's very unfortunate, the things that go on there. So if the town wants to continue to have a public beach at Tioga, they really need to step up their game.
Okay. Thank you.
Lisa, I just would like to make one quick comment. When the Recreation Department budget was slashed a couple of years ago, one of the things that was eliminated was the beach manager. And
I
so
understand
think-
that, Ann, but this summer it was reinstated and we still had no beach manager, nor did we have a lifeguard. There is not one single town employee at Briar Point.
So
It's,
even if, okay, well, that's another issue we should look into, because if that position was reinstated, then you should have seen the presence of that person.
well, I have talked up and down thousands of times in front of the town council with my town council person to complain. As a person who lives around Briar Point, it's a terribly managed asset of the town, and nothing changes.
Okay,
We have
thank you.
worked all summer with nothing.
I'll pass on that comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bob, I see your hand up.
So Emily, I'm going to have to exit at this point.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. If there's anything else you want to share or comment on, please, shoot me an email. We'll get it incorporated.
Very good. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bob, go ahead.
No, it was a residual hand up, sorry.
Okay, all right. Any other questions or comments on the draft chapters thus far?
The only thing I'll do, sorry, Emily, is just to echo a little bit of what you said. I know that some people have submitted some information to me. I just haven't been able to get it all into the consolidated spreadsheet yet to get it off to Emily. But I think most of the ones that I've received, you've received at least a copy of, Emily, on the side. But there are definitely some that I've received that you may not have yet.
Yeah, sure. So, and that's the way we've been doing these reviews that you all saw when I would send my initial email. I'd say, please review and provide your comments to Herb by this date. And that was usually 2 weeks from when I sent the email. And then Herb would take whatever time he needed to compile all those comments into one spreadsheet that I could share with my staff, just to save us the time of filtering through multiple different spreadsheets. And which is why I'm saying that I haven't seen everyone's comments yet. It's just a budget management thing. We want to make sure that we're being the most efficient that we can be with the comments that we receive. So what that means is we asked for comments on, let's see, cultural, historic, services and utilities and energy by July 14th. But we haven't addressed those yet because we are still waiting on additional comments. We asked for the last 3, economic development, natural resources, and hazards and climate change by August 17th, but we still haven't incorporated those changes. It doesn't take us a really long time to incorporate the changes once I tell my team to go for it. But again, I don't want to throw all the information at them until they have everything that they're going to get. And at that point, once we do incorporate those comments and talk through the input and essentially come to decisions on how we want to incorporate it and where these drafts need to be changed, we do all that and then they can go to the state for review, and we start that 4-week process. Once they have some chapters, they are on the hook to get back to us more quickly with subsequent chapters. But there will be some turnaround time. And we may ultimately, after the public meeting, we may need to talk about revisiting our committee schedule in the winter to make sure that we have enough time to really incorporate the results of that committee meeting and make sure that we're waiting for the input from the state before we jump into the next phase. All that to say, we appreciate all the comments and we understand that everyone has a lot going on. But for anyone who is still planning on submitting comments, please do try to do that in as timely a manner as possible. And Sherry will get you those chapters tonight or tomorrow, so you can get started on that. Anne, I see a hand up.
One short comment. First of all, the chapters are very descriptive, lots of history. I really found that I was learning a lot, even though I've been in town for a long time and been involved in government. So I found the history in the background extremely comprehensive and very interesting. And I like that lots of the data sources were very current and up to date. But I listened to a recent Planning Commission meeting, and the decisions that the Planning Commission is making, you always hear the phrase, this is supported by the comprehensive plan. This is supported by the comprehensive plan. So when I read the chapters, I said to myself, how would a planning commission use the information in any one of these chapters to support a decision? And maybe that's not a good question to ask, but that was the question I was asking myself. So I went to the summary of each of these sections, and I still wasn't sure how a planning commission or even a zoning board of review, et cetera, or even economic development commission would use information in the comprehensive plan to guide decision-making. So I need to understand better how the comprehensive plan can be used or may be used moving forward, because there's a lot of work going in, there's a lot of research, and I'm looking at that summary section and I'm saying, how do they use it? How can you use it to make good decisions?
Absolutely. That's a great question, and I'm happy to answer it. It's, I think, a pretty straightforward answer. Frankly, the parts of the plan that are used by a planning commission in that way haven't been written yet. We're going to start to talk about them tonight, but it really begins with the vision. It follows with the goals, and then it gets very specific with the policy statements and the actual actions. And those are the things that the planning commission and elected officials would be referring to. Those are the parts of the plans that they'll go back to. The reason we do everything that we've done so far is to very clearly create the structure upon which the factual basis upon which we can elevate those goals and the policies and the actions, to say that the recommendations of this plan aren't coming out of thin air. They're coming out of research, they're coming out of public input, and they're coming out of historical issues that continue to be identified, continue to be rearing their heads. So that, does that make sense, Anne? It's sort of just that what you were looking for hasn't come through our process yet. It does obviously exist from the previous plans, but we're not there yet.
Okay, well, that's good clarification, because I was wondering if I was missing something or it was going to be there or not there. And now that I understand your explanation, I'll be waiting with bated breath for all of this other, was it vision, goals, and policies?
There you go. Yep.
Thank
Vision,
you.
goals, policies, and actions.
Oh,
If
actions,
if I
okay.
can interject a little bit too, comprehensive planning by its very nature is adversarial. For instance, the best soils for on-site septic are the best for agriculture as well as like industrial related developments. So you're going to have chapters, they're going to talk about protection or whatever of agricultural resources, natural spaces, open space, and all that. And you're going to have chapters that are going to say we need to develop in town, we need to put in affordable housing, we need to do X, Y, Z. In some respects, those chapters are going to conflict with one another. typically what happens in a municipal plan is that there's an overarching principle or the vision, as Emily had talked about. And ultimately, a planning commission has to look at, through its staff, has to look through those various chapters and the different sections that make up those chapters, and to make a general recommendation to the planning commission, and where there's contradiction, to fall back on the vision overall. So that's generally how, that's in a very brief sense, how a staff has to work and coordinate with the planning commission to make a determination of conformance with a comprehensive plan. Technically speaking, if the state or developers were really astute, they would be questioning, especially if there was a finding of nonconformity, because your plan technically expired almost 20 years ago. So you technically don't have a plan of record by which to make a determination of conformance. So I couldn't, so on any given day, I can't make a positive finding one way or the other. But we've continued to use the plan. That's been the modus operandus. And then hopefully, like Emily described, we're going to have that overarching vision, as well as the goals, policies, and objectives.
Thank you, Emily and Herb. I greatly appreciate that conversation.
All right. Any other questions before we move on? So the next thing on the agenda is to talk about that vision and those goals. Anyone not have the attachment that was sent out just before this email? Sorry, just before this meeting, and you don't have it. So I will share my screen and just let me know if you are able to see the text. Let's see here.
Do you have it up? There we go.
Yeah, are you guys seeing that?
There it goes. Yeah.
Okay, great. So what we're gonna scroll through here, and anyone who's got the attachment open, you're seeing the whole thing. This is a synthesis and a summary of a number of different inputs that you all are familiar with. The first would be your previous plan, the 2010 attempt at a plan, and the 2017 efforts to update the plan. So all of those are taken into consideration. They were sort of, when you're looking at visioning and goals, our team looked at all of those as background. Specifically 2017 really is what that process came up with that was maybe new or different. So that's sort of the first group. The second group of information that feeds into what is on this sheet is our own research. A lot of the findings that came out of our existing conditions analysis. And so what we as professionals were hearing from the interviews that we took, and all of the other research that went into those chapters. And the third source of information for these draft goals and vision statements were the input received from our public meetings, from our public meeting, I should say, and the survey. So all of that public data, and that includes the 2017 comments and everything that came out of the district events that were held during that 2017-2018 period. So we incorporated all of that input here. And what we've developed is a series. Oh, one other area I almost forgot. The State of Rhode Island statewide planning guidance, their handbook actually has some very good language recommendations, questions, sort of guiding questions for each discipline area about the types of goals that a municipal plan needs to have in order to meet the statewide requirements. And essentially, they want to see that you've evaluated how well your plan aligns with the goals and recommendations that the state makes relative to that discipline. So that's not ever going to be our deciding factor. We're not like including something that we haven't heard or read or seen in Coventry that the state tells us we need. We're actually not putting that in here yet, but where there is something that aligns, that's helpful for us. We can see how the state's talking about it, how statewide plans or programs support that goal. And then that gives us some information that we can use here. So we started, my team and I started by taking a look at all of that stuff together and brainstorming one overarching vision. And that's never going to be able, you know, it's not easy to do in a sentence. It's not possible to do in a sentence, but we came up with the statement that's on top here. And I want to say that we're not worried about being repetitive amongst the chapters. Like Herb said, there's going to be disagreement in some chapters, but there's also going to be a lot of overlap. And the overlap is really the meat of a comprehensive plan, because while we separate things into chapters, so much of it is interconnected and related. So the vision statement, this would be something that would be sort of the introductory piece that should cover everything, all of the elements. Is Coventry's residents commune while supporting local businesses, attending town events, walking and biking on Coventry's safe roads and trails, and visiting Coventry's park and recreational facilities. Town pride stems from well-maintained services and facilities, preservation of natural and historic resources, and inclusive community spaces. Future development balances the needs for increased housing, preservation of natural resource areas, that should say, desire for community and understanding of climate change impacts, and resiliency. Coventry is a town that embraces diversity and strives to meet the needs of all residents. So like I said, it's pretty all encompassing there. As we go through this handout, we'll go element by element here. I think what I would ask for the purposes of our time together tonight is that we focus our discussion, and Herb, feel free to weigh in on this if you think, if you disagree with my approach, but my thought is that we focus on the goal statements during our discussion tonight. And I would really appreciate if folks, after this meeting, if you do have comments on the vision statements for each of these elements or for the overarching one, please send us those comments via email afterwards. Knowing how it, having done this before, I know this discussion can take a very long time, and I want to make sure that we're at least hitting all the elements in some way. So that's my recommendation for the discussion. Herb, does that sound appropriate?
Yep, that's good. I think if people make changes in the future, suggestions, you know, having your tracking on is very helpful in terms of trying to pull stuff together, especially if there's somebody that is astute at Emily's office that can just pull that into any draft in the future. And then if it's accepted, they just accept it. So if you can turn on your track changes, that would be great.
So in order for folks to do that, I have to send a Word document, which I will do.
Well, maybe never mind.
Nope, I'll do that. I'll do that after this meeting. And I will just say that the reason I want to focus on the goals tonight is because these vision statements, you should all recognize, they really did come directly out of our public meeting and the input that you all gave us during those visioning exercises that we did at the public meeting. So starting with land use here, you know, your last plan has a lot of goals and a lot of policies and a lot of actions. And I said at the beginning of this process that our goal is to streamline this a bit. We want to have a cleaner, leaner document. And that really starts by being clear on what is a goal and what is a policy and what is an action. And while visions can be way top level, goals are sort of the next step. My challenge to my team, and whenever I'm doing a plan, my challenge to myself is to develop goals that really are direct, they're to the point, they reflect what we've been hearing, but they also, it's easy to come up with actions and to hear people say, we ought to do this, we ought to do that. I want to come up with goals that are inclusive of as many of those actions as possible. Because in that way, we're building this framework. We've got the existing conditions, that's way down here. We want the goals to be sort of the next all-encompassing thing so that we can stack policies and actions on top of them. So it doesn't behoove us to have 7 goals per element, though we may in some cases. Really, what we want to do is be as clear as possible. So that is my entree to asking for you all to comment and give us feedback if we have missed something totally, and maybe we need another goal in here. But know that if you're not seeing it here, it doesn't mean that it's not part of our thinking or not part of where we're going with this. It might just be something that is an action or a policy that will fall under one of these. So with that, land use, we've got our vision here saying Coventry is a collection of villages that are unique in character and united in belonging to the greater vibrant, prosperous, and thriving community. Local businesses and large companies live in harmony with the budding residential neighborhoods in our mixed-use village centers. That's our vision. That's what we want. Our first goal here is develop planning policies and design guidelines to ensure all new development contributes to smart and creative residential and commercial development and protects environmental quality. And our second goal is to enhance the aesthetic quality and overall livability of Coventry's existing neighborhoods. Anne, I see your hand up.
I think you said that if we had a comment about the vision statement, we should send it in, but I just want to point out that I'm going to challenge the whole concept that Coventry is a collection of villages. I believe that was true back in the 1800s or 1700s, but I don't see thriving villages in Coventry. Take the village of Summit. That consists of one variety store, which has a post office inside. That's it. There's nothing else that characterizes that former village. It was a railroad stop, etc. And I have driven through Coventry and I really can't identify villages. I think that we have associations of, I would say, community centers that are built up around, say, Tioga Lake and Breezy Lake, etc. But I would like us at some future meeting to really talk about this collection of villages, because I think that will direct in some way the goals and policies that will be made.
I agree. I think it's a really good point. And we've talked a lot in this group about certain villages, certain sort of community centers or centers of activity. And so maybe what's happening is that there are some village centers that align with the traditional village centers and there are some that don't. So maybe we need to get our terminology right. Bob?
Okay, I'm still off mute. Well, I think there's more to Summit than just the Summit General Store. I mean, the village isn't a tight-knit village anymore, but there's a lot more there, from Casella's store to the fire station, to the Summit Baptist Church, to the school, to the former fire station, which was a business, and I'm not sure what it is right now, but there's more to Summit than this, the general store. But I think it's, Summit kind of doesn't identify as much as a village as the sprawling village of Green, which still does really have a village atmosphere, and it's trying to preserve the rural character. And I mean, the term out there is a Greenite, and there's people that have lived there for 100 years and they hold on to or families that have lived there for 100 years, as well as probably a couple people that have lived there for 100 years and really want to keep it the way it is.
I understand what you're saying. It may be a culture. it may be a philosophy. And I think it's a question worth discussing, perhaps not this evening, but I just want to raise the point that we really do need to have a better idea of what the word village mean or collection of villages mean and how this actually directs goals and policies.
Tom, go ahead.
Two phrases that I don't see that are probably appropriate in land use that we saw in a lot of the documentation. The first one is the term open space. So I think planning policies need to, be aligned with one of the things that the survey says, and that's the protection of open space, especially in the western part of Coventry. So I think that term open space, we might be able to use somewhere within a goal. The second one is used by the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management, and they actually have maps for them, which is what they call unfragmented forest blocks. And they have large ones and small ones, and that goes along very nicely with open space because it actually states that it's protecting the forest that's there, not punching out house lots in the middle of the forest, but protecting it as a block. So just two terms that you may want to run by your team and see, especially in goal number 1, but wherever you feel it's appropriate.
Yeah, point taken, Tom. I'm gonna just play devil's advocate here for a moment with two responses. So the first is that let's revisit these thoughts when we get to the open space chapter and the natural resources chapter and see if we hit the marks with those. But the second is that I think I would argue that goal 1, where we say protects environmental quality, could be inclusive of policies that say exactly what you just said. And that goes back to my earlier point of seeing how we can be as inclusive as possible with these goals in a way that allows us to get more specific as we progress to the policy statement and then to the action statement.
All right, so you're thinking that they may be the next level down.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm good.
And those terms also may be specifically the open space should be in goals in other chapters, even while they might be in policies and or actions under land use, if that makes sense.
Yep, thank you.
Sherry?
I think I have to disagree. I think that we need the open space in with the land use as well. I think it needs to be, in more than just the open space area. I think the comments that Tom had made are actually very good ones, and they should also be in the land use, because what'll happen is the planning board will look at the land use and will say, well, it doesn't say it here. According to the land use, we're fine. So we're going to go ahead and do it.
Sure.
Seeing things too much, you know what I mean? Like, honestly and truthfully, I think it needs to be in both areas. Could be wrong, but that is my sound opinion.
No, so, and I agree, and maybe I was unclear. I totally agree with you, and I agree with what Tom said. My point is that where the term open space and where the term open space protection and even forest blocks or fragmentation of connected open spaces, where those terms will be found under land use would be in that next level, which would be a policy. So the policy statement could be, for instance, to utilize your open space residential development bylaw to protect critical environmental areas and recreational open spaces through your land use code. It would be looking at the land use tools that are available or that could be available if you developed them to meet the goals in other chapters, essentially, and to meet the land use goals, to meet the open space goals, to meet your goals for natural resources. So that's where in the land use chapter, you'll be hearing those terms. And then you'd hear about it again in the other chapters. But I'm agreeing with you in that those should be in the land use chapter. But I'll make a note of that, and we'll bring it back to the team and think about, whether there's an opportunity to include some of that language right in the goals. But we'll also, we'll see how it works with the policies once we start rolling out those policy statements, to see if you all are more comfortable with the current formulation of these goals once you see those policy statements right underneath them. Because I understand that it's hard to, you're only seeing what you're seeing right now, right? So, but I appreciate the comments, and they are noted. Larry?
No, I appreciate that. I'm sorry, I missed it. I thought you meant it wouldn't be addressed in that area at all. It would only be in the open space. So
Right.
I apologize.
Yep, not at all.
All right, thank you for clarifying.
Sure. Larry, I see your hand.
Yeah, one quick comment on the villages idea. It's interesting that we have 4 National Register villages. Having just finished mapping all of this, I can tell you, we have 4 National Register villages: South Main, Anthony, Rice City, and Hopkins Hollow. And yet there's not a single sign telling you when you're entering those districts, even though the Historical Commission has been working forever to try to get some. Meanwhile, we have Hill Farm, Harris, Arkwright, Green, Summit, Coventry, and Center and Quidnick, which were identified in the 1978 survey as villages. So we have 10 villages. We were a collection of villages, but because there's, you wouldn't know that just driving around town except by place names. I have a feeling most of the residents of the town have really no idea, especially if they're young, have no idea of the historical village aspect, and therefore I'm not sure they really identify that much, except for the older people, identify that much as being part of a village. So we might insert the word historical in that list there to point out that maybe we're a collection of historical villages, but now maybe not so much.
That's a good point. I mean, I think between that point, Larry, and Ann's comment earlier, that it sounds to me like there ought to be a discussion of revisiting what the goal is, and whether we're using the term villages or historic villages or something else is a big part of that. But I think whether we're talking about those 10 historic villages or whether we're talking about a fewer number of central nodes, activity nodes, or areas with a distinct character and a distinct pathway forward, I think there are very clearly different sections of this town that will identify with that section or that area or that village. And so that's really what I'm hearing, that we need to have a better understanding of how we want to be thinking about these going forward and how we want to be talking about them going forward. And that is something that we need to hear from, we need to get from the committee and from residents, but I think from the fact that we're still calling them villages, it seems to me that my team isn't hearing enough of the what else or what to call instead. Lynn, I see a hand up there.
Yeah, just a quick suggestion, just in terms of my own thought process about how I think of Coventry. I think of it more as neighborhoods. The neighborhood of Anthony. So maybe that word could be used in addition to historic villages or something like that. Just a thought.
Yeah, that's a good
We're
idea.
not supposed to be actually critiquing this right now, but I just thought I'd throw that out there.
No, we are definitely for the goals. This is all, I want all the feedback.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't know, again, just neighborhoods is, I mean, you can think of it broadly as Eastern Coventry and Western Coventry, but if you want to even narrow it down further than that, then the neighborhood of Anthony or something like that might work.
Yeah. And there's a lot of discussion, as you guys have read, about Eastern Coventry and Western Coventry. There are plenty of lines of distinction that we can draw just by that alone, but it just seems like there's more. And I think we're not doing the town justice by just making that single distinction and saying everything in Eastern Coventry is this way and everything in Western Coventry is this way. I think there's so much more. And so that's really why you're seeing that term still used, villages, because I think we haven't really nailed it down yet.
Emily,
Yes.
there's a couple things that I've heard, and one is we need some level of a glossary. And having been in municipal government for over 35 years, that is the one piece that really is necessary in municipal planning and comp plan. So when we use the term open space as a, for instance, at least we have a common denominator of understanding of what it is with, if there's a particular glossary, put it at the end of the plan, wherever. But if someone really wants to understand what the term means, that's what we need to do. The same thing with some of these other terms that we've used. And then dovetailing that, sometimes it's better to talk in the sense of a chronology rather than, you've all hinted at it today, is to say, well, it used to be 10 villages, then it funneled down to this, and now we're in neighborhoods. I also want to be sensitive to the fact that we've all talked about issues that are white man issues, right? So we haven't talked about, we've only talked about, say, villages as it pertains to when we took over Rhode Island, but we haven't talked about any of the indigenous tribes and all that sort of stuff that actually were here and had their own probably communities related to the rivers and that sort of thing. So I want to, if we're going to be diverse, we need to be diverse in the particular plan.
Yeah, and so I just noticed after this whole conversation that the word villages actually isn't in either of these goals. It's just in that policy statement,
Right,
which is the thing I said we weren't going to talk about, but I'm glad we're talking about it. And that's a great point, Herb. And so villages, neighborhoods, gathering places, centers of community. These are all alternative ways that we can think about using alternative words that we can think about using
Right.
in this vision statement.
Yeah, I'm sort of what I'm getting at is that some of our discussion really belongs in the history section, of the comp plan. Land use as we have the existing land use section, and then as we get into the future land use visioning and stuff, we're looking forward. So whatever terms that we use needs to be looking forward. And I understand sometimes there needs to be links to the past to generate that forward looking, but I don't think we should get too caught up in some of the terminology per se as it relates to land use, because we want to be looking forward and what do we want when we go forward? I mean, do we want 10 villages that are separate and distinct from the rest of the community? Do we want all of Western Coventry being open space, et cetera, et cetera? So that it's sort of asking the question that way. And then sometimes what I find helpful is, most of the time we teach people don't jump to the action step first. We got to first do the vision and then the goal and then the objective, and then we get to the steps for implementation. But sometimes it's good to throw on the table those action steps that you want to do and then work backward from it so that you work up and ultimately you get your goal that you want to go after, rather than trying to create the goal first.
Yeah, and that's fair, and that is that's pulling back the curtain on our process, right? Because we've been spending a lot of time looking at all the input and looking at all of our findings, and we've got our lists, we've got our ongoing action list and ongoing policy list, and from that we develop these goals. And I shut all of that down when I made this PDF. But you're right, Herb, that's something that maybe if there needs to be a committee meeting, whether it's separate from our team or whether it's us sort of backtracking at our next committee meeting, we look at it that way. Obviously, we're not prepared to do that tonight, but that's a fair comment.
Yeah, I mean, I know I can put myself in Tom Pendergast's room right now as it pertains, Conservation Commission. He's also, is next to one of our larger water bodies and is very involved in that. And I'll bet you in 2 seconds, I'll give him 2 minutes, he could come up with 10 or 20 different things that need to be done in this town to protect those areas that he's intimately involved with as it pertains to his volunteerism. And from that, I think then there can be there's a map for the future, and then we can back into the goals and the objectives as it relates to it.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and it's a part of our process. The discussion about goals, and I think the value in having this discussion without thinking too much about those actions and without having them in front of us is just that we want to make sure that we're being inclusive of all of the things that might not have floated to the top of the the loudest voices might not be singing the chorus yet for some of the need, and we want to make sure that that's part of the goals, even if they didn't show up at the public meeting, even if it's not the same thing that people have been saying they need for years and years and years. Not to say that those things that have been coming up aren't still needs, but the goals sort of help us capture the people that we aren't hearing from. So thank you for that input. Any other thoughts on land use before we jump down to transportation? All right. So the next chapter here is transportation. And when you guys were doing this process in 2017, 2018, the title that you used for this chapter was Transportation Access and Mobility, and I really like that, so I kept it here. If anyone has anything against that, I'm happy to entertain it, but otherwise I think that's something that came out of the last process that is descriptive and valuable, and so we're running with it. So the vision that we compiled is Coventry, again, this is forward-looking, not to be confused with the existing conditions finding, but forward-looking. Coventry has a well-maintained system of roads, sidewalks, bicycle paths, and public transit that enables all people, regardless of age and ability, to travel safely throughout town. The town is proactive in planning for future technologies and demographic shifts that will impact land use and mobility, and takes an environmentally responsible and accessible approach to new development. So this is going to be the first example of where a vision of a different chapter says a lot about land use, and that's going to happen a lot. This is, after all, a comprehensive plan, which is steeped in the land use planning tradition. So the goals for this chapter that we've started with are: ensure Coventry's roadways are safe for all users. This is that was a typo, but ensure Coventry's roadways are safe for all users. And the second goal is to increase multimodal accessibility and connectivity to schools, open space, natural resources, and commercial areas from any part of town. So focusing first on safety, and second on multimodal accessibility. Tom, go ahead.
I might consider, because I'm looking at my notes, and I think you're right. Everything that I wrote down is the next level down. But as I look at goal number 3, it relates to one of my lower downs, and you might consider safe and effective, because there's a lot of roadway in the town of Coventry that's not effective. Examples, there are sidewalks where there's no need for sidewalks, so we don't need to maintain that anymore. But maybe safe and effective, because safe in and of itself is, well, it's a pretty big word, so a pretty all-encompassing word.
Yeah, I'll think about that. Safe. Yeah, that's a good point. I don't think we really thought. I don't think that's really captured in here in the way that you're talking about it. So.
Yeah, or safe and efficient or something like that. So.
It's like, say, yeah, whether the features and the elements of the network are appropriate and meet the need, right? Yeah, great point. We'll wordsmith this one. Lynn.
Yeah, thanks. In the context of making the vision statement forward-looking.
Yep.
I'm wondering if, and this could be just semantics about the way I think of things when I read something like this, but when I read Coventry has a well-maintained system of roads, I may think to myself, well, no, it really doesn't. So I'm wondering if it's possible to twist the wording to say, you know, again, making it forward-looking to say something like Coventry will have a well-maintained system of roads and the town will be proactive in planning.
Yeah,
Um,
this is, I hear you completely, and this is a matter of taste is the best way that I can see it. You'll see some plans that say, we strive for this, or we will do this, or we will be this, and you see other plans that say, this is what we are. Our vision of the future is this. You know, we introduce a vision statement and we introduce a plan by describing vision statements as saying, this is the Coventry that we want to be. And so these are active statements. These are real-time statements because this is how we want to be describing ourselves in 20 years. So it's really a matter of how the committee wants to present the findings of this plan. So if anyone else has thoughts on that front, and this would be a good time to talk about it.
I
I-
agree.
I
I
have-
agree with Lynn on how I read it because I laughed when Coventry has a I laughed right there.
Yep.
But I like your approach where this is our vision, this is where we want to be, because we then have a couple of goals, but our policy is what's going to get us there. Our policy is going to get us to that vision.
Right.
But I did think the same way as Lynn at first, but yes, Coventry, I want to say Coventry has a well-maintained system. And so when something comes before any of the boards that have to approve something, they're going to say, yes, that's going to get us to our vision, but that's going to show up more in the action items or the policies that are going to be created from this.
It's one of these things like if you listen to or read self-help books, they all say, have affirmation statements, positive statements that you say to yourself, and eventually you'll get there. And I think that's the theory behind putting the visions out this way. But the takeaway is, so if we do keep them in this format, my takeaway here is that we need to be very deliberate in our introduction to the plan about how we are framing them and why they're being framed that way.
Absolutely.
Is everyone comfortable with proceeding in that way? And Lynn, does that sort of address your concern if we're sort of calling it out and reminding everyone as they're reading it that this is where we want to be?
Yeah, I'm okay with that. I guess having it in the introduction or in some place that this says something to that effect about the vision statements are written as proactively what we intend to happen or something like that. Yeah, that works.
Okay, I've got a couple other hands up, so maybe we've got disagreement here. I'll start with Bob.
Okay, I agree with what a lot has been said, and maybe it's a semantics, but maybe changing the words to something like Coventry shall have a well-maintained system of roads. It's kind of present, future, visionary, and kind of, again, commanding with the shall statement that kind of makes a more forceful statement versus a sentence. And there were some in the sections I reviewed that have made me laugh, and this, I agree, was another one that made me laugh, especially with the street I have.
Yeah.
But in goal number 3, is there any way to enhance the goal to talk about the roadways are safe for the present state and will be maintained state? It's maintained safe as usage increases or as future uses impact the roadways? Because a road may be fine today, but you put up a 70 unit condominium on a country road and the road may not be safe because there's nothing that mandates the developer to do any road improvements.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And I know we actually addressed that in the services and facilities section, although I don't recall now if that's a policy statement that we were playing around with, or if it's a goal that we'll see tonight. But I think it is something that we could incorporate in goal number 3 as well. Just something about the temporal aspect, about the future looking, and the we're talking about safe today and safe 10 years, 20 years from now.
Yeah, thank you.
Anne, I see your hand next.
Yes, because I've written so many policies, I tend to like to use the word shall or must in relationship to a policy and not necessarily a vision statement. A vision statement to me is a statement of a future condition. And so we want to have a well-maintained system of roads. So I'm comfortable with the word has. The second sentence, the town is proactive in planning for future, whatever. That sentence seems to have a lot of buzzwords in it and not really sure what it means. And I think that it needs to be revisited. Demographic shifts that will impact land use and mobility. I'm not sure what mobility actually refers to. An environmentally responsible, my gallery is over the words, accessible approach to new development. I think that needs to be wordsmithed a little bit so that we basically understand what it means. And I think we could do that once we get through the goals and policy statements. Sometimes it's good to go back to the vision statement and say, is everything in alignment? And my last comment is goal number 3, where it says roadways are safe for all roadways are safe for all users. It seems to be some problem with the use of words there, because I see all these the word safe a couple of times, and I'm not sure if that's a mistake or not.
Yeah, it is. It's a typo. And I believe the way I read it, because I'm quite sure that the way it's supposed to be written here is just ensure Coventry's roadways are safe for all users. So there are a few words in there that are repeated.
Okay, thank
so
you.
That's a typo. Sure. No, but it's a good point. So I'm hearing another vote for the so I've got two initial votes, at least for the shall in our vision statements, and 2 for the present tense with an introduction. And Larry, I'll give you the floor now. Maybe you can be the tiebreaker. Larry, you're still muted. All right, maybe Larry has stepped out.
No, there we go. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Hard to find. No, I strongly go for the shall, or our goal is to have a well-maintained, because in this day of social media, you know what'll happen. This one sentence will get taken out of context, stuck somewhere in Facebook, and be the laughing stock of Facebook because they haven't read the introduction. It says, well, this is just a current statement. So given the proclivities for the public to do this kind of thing, I suggest we make it crystal clear that this is a goal we want to achieve.
And I think that's what you said, Larry, is interesting, because you say it's a goal we want to achieve. So that really belongs in the goal statement. The vision is a picture of it's a picture of a state that we want to be in. So I'm still maintaining my interest in the word has or is, but I understand the use of shall, but I think it's more appropriate for a policy.
Here's a thought, and it sort of bridges the gap here. As we introduce these vision statements, and this is going to be something that if you can picture a front page to each of these chapters, going to have some graphic. It's going to look really nice. It's going to say the chapter title, and then it maybe has some quotes about the vision up front, and then maybe we list the goals, and that's sort of how we introduce each of these chapters before we get into the the detail in the background. If in introducing the vision statement, which we would keep as a present tense, as Anne's suggesting, but if the words that lead into it rather than vision statement are the 2022 comp plan envisions ... something of that sort. So that it is the same sentence, to Larry's point, because I hate to say it, but you're right. I don't think about that sort of thing, but it very well could happen. But it could happen in any case. I mean, someone could take the middle of a sentence and post it. And, if they want to make that point, if they want to be nasty, they can still do it. But at least in this way, they don't have to go back to the beginning introduction to a different chapter where we provide a definition. It's all right there in the same paragraph, in the same sentence in some cases. And I was just doing that off the cuff, and I would come up with a much better way to do it. But could that maybe sort of meet everyone's concerns?
It sounds like a reasonable suggestion.
Thumbs up from Larry. Okay, I see some head nods. Good, thank you.
Yeah.
So
Some to change that vision statement : to clarify really what it means would be good.
yeah, okay, great. I like that. If anyone has any thoughts, while they're walking the dog and comes up with the best way to say it, definitely reach out. But that's something I'll sit down with my team and we'll do some brainstorming around. I'm just going to make a note. Great.
While you're still making a note, you may have it anyway, but, and as much as some people won't read it up front in the plan, many books will say, here's what's coming in the coming chapters or whatever. It might be good to just have a description of how the reader should read the plan.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
that the vision statements are intended to do X, Y, Z. The existing conditions are supposed to do A, B, C.
Yep. All right. Great. Let's move on to the next chapter here, which is economic prosperity and sustainability. This again is the heading that came out of the 2017-2018 process. I liked it. I like that you're adding sustainability in the chapter title, not even necessarily because of the three stools, environmental part of sustainability, though I do like that part, but also because economic development and economic prosperity is not something that happens in a year, and you don't aim for a boom season or a boom 3 years. You want something with longevity, and that's why I really like the way that this is phrased. So again, we liked it. We're sticking with it unless anyone wants to object here. Our vision here is Coventry is an attractive place to live, play, and work for families and individuals of all economic backgrounds and income levels. The local economy draws both entrepreneurs and established businesses, partnerships, opportunities, etc. Local land use regulations balance open space with economic development to ensure Coventry is a town that attracts high-tech, low-impact businesses with shared goals towards sustainability. So clearly, we took the lead of this title that you guys came up with a few years back, and crafted the vision statement based on the feedback that we've received so far to go to really draw a more detailed picture of what economic development and prosperity means in Coventry. So then the goals that follow, of which there are 4, are Coventry attracts high-tech, low-impact businesses with shared goals towards sustainability. And that's my bad, because I didn't take it out of the vision statement when I made that into a goal. or vice versa, rather. It was supposed to be in the vision statement and not a goal. So the first goal would be develop the SR3 corridor at Hopkins Hill Road connecting between Sandy Bottom and SR 117 as a year-round strolling area, an economic destination, and a recreational asset for Coventry residents and visitors. And this is just a sort of note here, is Garden City Cranston as an example. Next, we have capitalize on historic and cultural assets to drive tourism and economic development. And finally, agriculture will remain an important use in historically farmed areas. And a note about the third one, this is one, you know, we've talked about agriculture. We've talked about the fact that it isn't a huge part of Coventry's culture today, and that it is a historically relevant piece. But we've also heard that people don't want what does exist to disappear. So we talked a lot about how we keep it in the plan without trying to make something out of nothing. In other words, without trying to boast that there is something that there isn't, or being unrealistic about what you might have in the future. So this was our attempt at saying, you know, there is some agricultural element of your local economy, and that there's a desire to see that have some longevity and last into the future. Tom, I see your hand up.
Yeah, just more of a question. So goal 7 and goal 8 are kind of all encompassing statements, yet goal 6 is extremely specific.
Yep.
Any reason why we would get so specific in a goal to actually call out a particular street name?
It's a very good point. I think this was a big challenge because of I think the reason this was in there, and I'm speaking on behalf of my team, is just how many times we heard this said, and probably my folks being concerned that if we didn't say it explicitly, we'd get a lot of pushback. But I kind of lean towards, I think, the thought behind your comment, which is that this is more of a policy or an action statement than it is a goal, whereas all of our other goals so far have been more broad, and like I introduced what a goal should be, they've been encompassing of these types of very specific.
Well, and the goal of a year-round strolling area, an economic destination, and a recreational asset for Coventry residents and visitors, I think is a good goal.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe the policy is to call out SR3 and blah, 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 right? But I like the goal. I just think that the first 10 words are too specific for the goal.
Yep, I agree. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Bob. Can some of this establishing an economic destination be part of the vision statement, and then the goal is the means of doing it?
It could be. I think the reason we pulled the establishing an economic destination into a goal is because we are talking about finding at least one area, but most of the conversation has been about a single area. So putting it into a goal, while the vision is to attract people and to have a sustainable base of economic activity, this specific goal is to say, let's centralize, let's build something around a certain area, right? And to Tom's point, we're getting ahead of ourselves by saying what the area is right now, but there's been a clear desire and call for having some place that people connect with and to and at. So that's my explanation as to why that would be a goal.
Well, I can see it as a goal, but you kind of also have to have a vision to create maybe a whatever you want to call it, a town center, which is an economic destination. We don't really have any of that in the vision.
You're looking for that clear delineation between the built and the natural environment.
Yep.
That's what you're looking to do. And then that one down below that you just scrolled up from is an area that is intended to be one that has a sort of a line or a circle drawn around it, so that that's an area of growth.
Right, and maybe you have to do some sort of incentive program to get that growth into there.
Right.
But that's an implementation rather than a goal.
Right. I'm basically quoting Vermont statute right now.
Yeah.
Not Rhode Island, but Vermont.
Because, as part of this, the vision that, I think a lot of us have talked about is to create this town center, which we don't have.
Right.
And this is kind of the goal with this, turns it into an implementation, but we don't have a vision of creating this town center and a center of community involvement.
Right.
Okay. So then, just to recap there, the changes to goal 6 that we talked about just a few minutes ago about keeping the year-round strolling area, et cetera, are still stand. But Bob, your point is that needs to be first introduced in the vision statement as the vision to have a clear town center that serves as a center of community and economic activity. Is that correct?
I think that captures it very well.
Okay. All right, great.
It doesn't even show up.
And I'll just add again that the goal number 5 should not be there. That's part of the vision statement. So that's our fault. Okay, any other questions, comments on economic? Yes, Anne, go ahead. Oh, we've got a
I'm
couple
sorry.
here.
I agree with Bob. We do need a statement about a town center. I'm not sure that I would have selected a short road called Sandy Bottom Road to connect Route 3 and 117. It doesn't seem like the appropriate place, and the comparison to Garden City does not seem quite right. I do believe that what Bob said is to have a vision, but I'm not sure where that vision would land. So I have a concern about goal number 6, and goal number 8, I believe, should start with a verb, just as the other goals start with develop and capitalize. Goal 8 should start with a verb also.
Thank you. Lynn.
Yeah, I think what you've already talked about will help clear my thinking to eliminate the actual identification of the specifics within that paragraph of goal 6. Take the specifics out, but then and maybe you already have this in your sort of list of action items that you're developing, but it would be investigate multiple potential areas and decide on a one or more central areas. I don't know that we should presume to identify any specific place without first doing a lot of research on where that best place might be.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And one of the policy ideas, actually, it would be more of an action that's come up a lot in our work on our end, is the concept of doing small area planning. So you see this a lot in cities and towns with distinctive neighborhoods or geographically distinct areas where you really dive in, you take your comp planning process and use that as a springboard to dive into more detailed economic development and land use planning for these small areas. And I think that would be the analysis and investigation that you're talking about.
Yeah, that sounds right. I mean, I'm just thinking of the people in Western Coventry, nobody wants to go over the Jamestown Bridge because Jamestown Bridge is too far. So I think even in Western Coventry, there might be some of that difficulty with commuting to a specific area. In eastern part is thinking, it's too far away.
Yeah, right. It's all about perspective.
Right. Yes, but the small planning areas, that sounds like a good action item or policy to have. Yeah, thank you.
Yep, sure. And Larry, I see your hand is still up.
Yeah, one or more town centers makes a lot of sense because we had 10 or 11 quote centers called villages back then. I think it's curious that the little park right across from Anthony Mill is called I think it's called Town Square, something like that. Back then, that was the town square for the entire town of Coventry. So I suspect we'll end up having maybe 3, 4, 5 major former villages become our town centers. And with small area planning, we can focus on making those destinations economically and otherwise.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you. Sherry?
Sorry, I couldn't unmute.
No worries.
So with that being said, then why wouldn't you call them village centers as opposed to town center and then have one major town center for the collaboration of the entire town to get together? I mean, if you're going to do that, why not do both?
It's a good question. And I've actually been hearing this discussion as the doing both part, as opposed to calling out one town center. And what you're asking is, well, can we talk about each of these small areas as having their own identity and economic prosperity and sort of path forward, but also talk about something that is distinctly Coventry, right? That's the question.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm looking at. Yeah, we can do our little centers, the little town centers for the little villages, for the little village areas, but have one big meeting place. They do some nice stuff over by the town hall and stuff. They've got the community garden. They do some movies. They do things like that. That's an area that we already own. Like, start making that, developing around that area. Why not? I mean, there's already things there that is technically, I think, pretty central in the entire town. If you look at the dynamics, I think that's the most central spot.
So I think, to someone's earlier point about not getting too specific about the where right now with the goals and the vision statement, but I want to elevate what you're asking, Sherry, because I think it's an important question to ask, which is, for this chapter or even for others, where we're talking about gathering centers and sort of centers of activity, do we need to specify or distinguish between something that is that connects the entire town versus something that connects these neighborhoods or these distinct areas? So I'd love to hear from other people on that.
I can tell you, do not be vague in your plan. As a planner, the vaguer you are, the less likely you will implement your plan or the thoughts of what you want in your plan. Because today we're talking, specifically, there's an area that we've talked about. I'm not saying this is good or whatever, but just as an example, you've talked about an area in the Hopkins Hill area as an area for growth. The town has resources available to itself to implement that, such as what's called an official map, capital budget and program, where you basically take limited community resources and target those areas that you've specifically identified as a community. So the limited resources that you have are going to go to the areas that you want development to go to, where you can anticipate it. If there's something that comes in somewhere else in town that you do not have designated in your capital budget or your official map or in your town plan, as a for instance, the developer is going to be put on the hook to put in any resources that are necessary in order to accommodate that particular development. You have evidence and proof to show that the community knows what it wants to do with its resources. You, developer X, are not coming into that particular area. Therefore, you're going to be responsible for providing those resources that are necessary in order for the development to go there. Conversely, if you do not identify areas of places like that or open space, you're going to subject yourselves to exactly what you complained about earlier today, which is where the Western Coventry is going away. It's all going to be developed. And so it's important to really spend some time. I understand you need a vision, which is broad-based. You need some goals, which are the next broad-based, and you work your way down into specificity. But if you opt to water down your plan now, you're going to give yourselves problems in the future for when I have to open up the plan and determine whether a project is in conformance with the town plan or not. Because if I don't have the language to rely on and it's just generic, I won't have the teeth to deal with it. On the other side of the coin is that in areas that you are targeting for open space and non-growth and all that sort of stuff, you need to have the discussion as to whether that's what you really want to do. Because there, as a for instance, the Planning Commission meeting that Ann listened to the other day, there are a number of folks that just don't want development in that area of town, period. But people that own property have the right to develop their property within the bounds of the regulations that you adopt. So you've got two constructs going on here that are in conflict with one another in this particular community. You have folks that already live in an area that perhaps were part of a development that the previous people didn't want them moving into, that are now there and they want the drawbridge pulled up. And then you've got some folks in the area that either have sold out or their retirement is built into their agricultural land, or there's somebody wants to do particular development, but yet there are a lot of folks that are saying no, even though the regulations allow it. So again, a level of specificity is important. I'm not saying Hopkins Hill is the way to go, but the caution I'm throwing to the wind is we can say, well, we've got to do additional study, which is all fair, but be cognizant of the fact that if you water down the plan somewhat, and you basically just say, well, this plan coming up has to spend some time to identify the areas. Some level of time is going to go by during the development process, or things that are basically disconnected from the town plan that may put you in a worse condition than if you had your discussion up front.
Herb, I think that with that being said, I have to disagree with you. I think that we do need one central location, that we have maybe that
Yep.
Route 3 corridor where Hopkins Hill is. But I also think that if we are going to continue to say that we are a town of villages that are united under one, we need to identify those villages and allow them to have their little centers. For example, I mean, Summit is a good
Totally
area.
agreeing with you on that, Sherry. Totally
Okay.
agreeing.
Oh, all right.
Totally.
I'm sorry. I thought you were saying that it was bad
No.
to water it down, and by doing what I was saying would water it down. I apologize, sir.
No, I don't want you guys to water things down. I want you folks to have the level of specificity where you really feel the strongest with regard to your plan. As a, for instance, everybody talks about, that at least participates in this process, talks about protecting Western Coventry from development. I can tell you today, if you just sort of talk about it, but don't have a level of specificity about how you're going to protect those areas versus what areas you're going to target for village centers or the town center overall, you're going to continue to lose Western Coventry. Because if you do the build out analysis of your existing zoning regulations in Western Coventry, you're going to be awful disappointed.
Right.
Oh, trust me, I know.
And that's where we get into, so goal 8 being part of the economic development chapter, the goal under the land use chapter about protecting natural resources, the goals under the natural resources chapter about protecting ecosystems. You know, there's housing, we have housing needs, but as Herb's saying, if you're not clear about how you meet the needs of one element without also meeting the needs of another, then something something gets missed, essentially. I want to give everyone a chance to talk. So I've got Larry and then Bob.
I'm curious. It seems like there must be a bunch of methods for creating a neighborhood or a town center from a former village and so forth. And I'm wondering if the goal should say, let's identify all the methods. For example, I'm working with the Historical Commission to create driving and walking tours of historical resources. Those, if they say we identified 3 or 4 areas that we want to focus on as town centers, then they ought to focus on developing walking and driving tours there and so forth, and identifying them as historic districts. Now, it's curious, I suggested at the last Historical Commission meeting that maybe the commission ought to be identifying local historic districts. All we have is state and national. And they said, oh, we've tried that. We got so much pushback. No way are we ever going to be able to do that. And yet it would seem like that would be one way to help develop the identity of a town center.
Point taken and noted. And I think what you're talking about is more of a policy or an action. But something that we'll look at and see, you know, if it aligns with the other comments that we've taken in on that front. Bob, and then Lynn, and then Anne.
Well, first, there was something that Herb said at the beginning of his couple minutes of discussion about creating an area where there was, you know, town resources available. And is there any way to kind of write that into a goal where we establish those centers and put those town resources to channel the economic or certain economic development into certain areas? Because looking back, you know, at the 2019 plan, there was the, you know, village center of Summit that was established in the comp plan. It never went anywhere, but the comp plan talked about it. And that was something that would have started establishing a Summit village center per se.
So looking at goal 6, which we're going to pare back to be more broad, I think that would be the place, in my opinion, to add a phrase or a statement about town resources, in my opinion, unless it's a different goal altogether. But I think of the 3 that we've got here, that would be where we could say something about support from the town, channeling town resources, etc.
You know, and there are parcels of land and, you know, in the Summit Village area that are ripe for economic development, particularly now that the old Summit Baptist Church is nothing but a ruin. That piece of land could easily turn into something that could do some, you know, enhancement of the neighborhood. And as you do that, some of the housing in that area could possibly be, you know, for lack of a better term, squeezed out with the right incentives, particularly if a business wanted to move in and buy them out. If that was the case and you really wanted to build that little economic area there.
Mm-hmm.
I'd also, I mean, we've got a very, what do you want to say it, a very localized little village center at the Green Library that is doing a lot between farmers markets and dinners and activities. And it's just a way to try to take that and enhance it. And I'm not sure what more you can do because, you know, it's one building with limited parking on a limited piece of land. So that would be the question of how you would take something like that, which is something that's got a lot of potential to grow and expand, but yet how do you set that up to help it expand?
Mhm. Yeah, those are good questions, and I don't have answers to them, but I get what you're asking there. Lynn, Anne, and then I've got a hand from Sherry.
Yeah, I guess my question is more back to Herb. Is it the case that if we, in this comp plan, if we do not specifically identify one or more places that we want to have as this town center strolling area economic destination, if those aren't specifically laid out in this comp plan, is that what I'm getting from you is that that's a detriment, that's a bad thing in terms of your being able to turn around and actually enforce that as you make decisions about developments and so forth. And if it is a detriment,
It's a lot easier for me to deal with conformity with a local plan, the more specificity there is. However, you don't want to over specify everything, because again, you're trying to create a vision for the community, right? And so your vision today is plans are evolutional. They change as each iteration of plan comes out, depending on how things have changed over time, right? Everything's dynamic, but so you want to have that schmaltzy vision type thing. But I think again, as you funnel down into it, there's a level of specificity that is needed in order for me to really have the strength of being able to say no developer A or whatever. And I'm not trying to badmouth developers, but to basically say, we haven't planned as a community to have development over in this area. The limited resources that we have, we've targeted these areas over in town, the town centers, the village centers, wherever that's going to be. And the resources that we are able to raise through taxes or grants or whatever that we've targeted, we've identified in our capital improvement program, we've identified in our official map that, and an official map, essentially, for those that don't know, is really a map that shows where your future infrastructure is going to go, such as sidewalks, updated roads, your new town center, whatever it might be, and you target the resources to go toward that. And so, if it's not within there, it can help the town out from the standpoint of, if there is a developer or a person that really wants to develop their property comes in and says, I really want to put the 30 units of housing here. Well, if the regulation allows for it, okay, well, we go through the review process. But when it comes to our impact fee ordinance or what have you, we've already targeted the resources to go elsewhere. So developer, if you can go in here under the regulations, the town engineer says you got to build a road to this spec, you've got to put some sidewalks in all by yourself, and it's not just a proportionate share cost. It is proportionate share cost, but it may be having to put the whole thing up front in from that standpoint. So again, specificity is important for me as a professional planner, but I will back off in saying that, again, plans are generational in their concept. They are going to evolve over time. There's just 5 or 6 of us sitting here tonight. There's no way we're going to come up tonight without, waiting until midnight to basically plan exactly where the development needs to go. That discussion has to occur over time. And it is appropriate to say, this is what we want to do. Here's maybe generally where we want to see it, but we need some additional study to further draw the actual boundaries around it, how high we want it to be, what specific infrastructure we may want in there, whether it's more recreationally based or totally commercial or some mixed use, and then identify the resources that we want to target to go to that particular area. The one earlier that we talked about, which was the rec beach, maybe it was refunded, but maybe nobody applied for the particular position of lifeguard because, for instance, there are beaches around throughout Rhode Island this year where they actually closed them on a couple days because they didn't have the staff, or they only had the half amount of the lifeguards that they needed. So there may have been explanation for something that may have been budgeted, but inability to carry out for the particular season. So I know I'm babbling a little bit, but the idea is if you can be specific in the plan, great, that's really helpful for me. Where you can't, set yourselves up with some goals that will get you to where you need to be in the future. Is that making sense?
Yeah, so I guess sort of what I'm hearing is that if we can identify, or that maybe somewhere in the action statements or policies, we state that the town has identified areas such as Hopkins Hill Road, you know, the Village Green Center or whatever as potential places for this town center. I guess trying to build in some level of specificity, but also making it general enough that it's not set in stone, that these are the actual areas we want, because we just don't know enough about them.
And it may be putting some safeguards in as well, and I'm a little far reaching right now for tonight's discussion, but you know, if you're not yet resolved as to where that town center should go, it's identifying that we want to sort of the central go-to place, but we also want to, you know, protect where we had the villages or try to regrow some of those villages to recognize the individualism that is prolific throughout the community. But if you can't identify that, then certainly you want to try to, as you said earlier, we need to do some analyses in order to delineate where that town center is, but also to gather some public input. In the interim, there may be some policy or other things that the town council might be able to put in place or be willing to adopt in their particular regulations that could at least help to buy some time, if you will, from that standpoint until that information is done. I mean, if somebody wants to come in, so as a for instance, is center of New England the town center that it was supposed to be, right? I don't think that it is. I don't think the town thinks that it is. It offers, you know, maybe a late 70s, early 80s avenue of what people considered to be sort of the new town center type of thing at the time, very traffic oriented and easy to get to from the interstate, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't think it's really what the town center is that people think should be for Coventry. You know, that it's kind of like you want to maybe plan yourself against the next Center for New England from coming in, or to amend your regulations, although I know that's sensitive because it's in court and all that sort of stuff, but maybe there is a way to recreate the Center for New England to be more of some of that at least destination spot without necessarily having to be all car driven. I mean, it's just as an example. And doing that through regulation updates. Maybe there is something that I personally don't believe in this, but there, at least up in Vermont, you had the ability to put a temporary moratorium on development through your regulation so that you could buy some time to do some additional planning and analysis for the kinds of things that we're talking about right now. Again, personally, I'm not supportive of moratoriums. I'm more supportive of doing the proactive things such as capital improvement programs and official maps that identify a community and where its resources, where it plans to put its resources, rather than stopping development from happening to hope that you can figure out those answers.
All right, so I'm aware of the time. We've now gone into the 7 o'clock hour. I see a couple other hands raised, and Sherry, I will give you a chance to, Sherry and Ann both, to talk. But I want to just talk quickly about next steps so that if folks do need to hop off. So on our end, we're going to be planning for the second public meeting, which again is going to be a discussion of goals. And I'm going to be talking with Herb, and we'll communicate with the committee as well about what that looks like. Again, our next plan committee meeting is after that public meeting. And I'm just thinking that given how rich of a discussion we had tonight, and given that we haven't even made it to half of the disciplines here, this warrants probably another meeting of this group. And whether or not I'm a part of that, I think it depends on a couple of things, but that's something, Herb, that you and I should discuss, and also take input from the committee. If you all are willing to meet as a group again, I think that it's probably a good idea. So Sherry, go ahead.
I'd be fine with meeting again. To go back on what Bob had said, you know, you identified Summit and you said building some business. Unfortunately, we need to be very careful in all of our districts as to the type of business that we're pulling in. Green and Western Coventry, that area is specifically agricultural. So any business that you are considering in that area should only be that. It should be wineries, it should be farm stands, it should be those types of things. They should not be businesses. I'm sorry, I don't want to go down the street and see a line of cars waiting to go to a Dunkin' Donut. I live out here because I want to be away from that crowded stuff, as does a lot of other people. We don't want that congestion. We like where we live. It's quiet, it's peaceful. Keep it that way. Make sure that in the areas, and when we're doing this, that we're identifying that as these areas are specific to that. I mean, zoning, they'll just give special use permits. If we say, okay, we're gonna build up the Summit general area and we'll allow businesses in over there, they'll just give special use permits and allow it all over the whole entire area eventually. And that's exactly what happens. So with that being said, I think we need to be very specific in all of the areas and making sure that they are following through. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm sure in the middle of town, you don't want another gas station, not a gas station, another car fixer up place or oil change place. Like there's 1,000 of them in town. We don't need any more. You know, there are certain things, Family Dollars. We don't need a Family Dollar up here. I got a Family Dollar down the road. If I want to go to Family Dollar, I make that run. So I think we really need to be careful about that as well. Yes, it's a great idea to develop the Summit area, but develop it in the manner that this area was meant to be developed, or the people envisioned it to be developed. That is all I have to say.
Thank you, Ann.
Thank you. Herb suggested at the beginning of the meeting that we need a glossary, and I would like to strongly vote for that. I've heard the term village center and town center, and I'm not sure what these terms mean anymore because everyone has a little different take on it. I'm not sure if the concept of a town center is a cultural engine, an economic engine, or what it is. So I've been sort of sitting here trying to think about where in Rhode Island do we have some of these town or village centers. So I was thinking about Chepachet, north on Route 102. It's a short section, but it has a number of antique stores, and that's sort of a strolling area. It doesn't have a lot to offer, but people do stroll up there. But it's because there are certain attractive stores there. I've been thinking of South County Common, and to me, the South County Common is probably the closest to a concept of a town center because it has a gazebo, it has retail space, it has housing, it has physician offices, a movie theater, and a hotel. And people do stroll in that area. So are we thinking of a community center or a town center that looks like something like South County Commons? Or are we thinking about something that looks like Garden City, which is over a considerable acreage, but basically it's retail, stores, clothing, places to eat, but nothing else other than a small gazebo in the center of a parking lot. So I think we do need to define what we mean by village center, community center, town center, and we need to have a clear idea of what that means, because that would determine what kinds of policies we would advocate for zoning in those particular areas.
Yep, that's a great point. Sherry, your hand is still raised, but I'm not sure if that's from your previous.
Sorry, that was from previous. I thought it was down.
Okay, any other questions, comments, thoughts before we wrap up here tonight? Oh, Bob, I see
Yeah,
your hand up.
One quick one, and that may be to, get everyone to look at the remaining goals and send in some comments. And maybe that would be a good starting point for where we go with the next meeting.
Yes, thank you. I don't know how I didn't say that yet, but certainly this doesn't end here. Like we put a lot into the rest of this, however many 5-page draft document, and we do want to hear, as much thought as we've already heard about the rest of them. So that by all means, begin by reading through them and jotting down your thoughts and sharing them with the group in an email. I'm going to send the Word version. So that's folks who like to do that. Track changes is certainly helpful for us. But I'm going to put it back to the group again to ask and suggest if another one of these discussions, actually a meeting to talk through some of these things, is warranted. And I see Lynn's hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you very much, Emily and Herb. You guys are doing a bang up job. And I just want to say thanks for all the effort that you're putting in, and please send it back to your team. That's all.
Will do. Thank you. I appreciate that. So I know I saw Tom nod his head, and I heard Sherry say that she's open to another meeting. Again, Herb, let's touch base on that, because it may be something that it's sort of an internal committee meeting, unless we want to steal some of our time back from one of the later meetings, but that's something we should discuss. All right, and with that, we'll close out. I will type up some notes from tonight. We do have this recorded. I'll be using the recording, and if anyone wants to revisit that, just ask Herb, or I can get the recording to you as well if you have any need to revisit the discussion here tonight. Thanks for your input and your thoughtful insights here, and we will look forward to your reviews on the chapters as well as the reviews on these goals. And we'll see you soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Thanks all.
Take care.
Bye, guys. Have a great night. Thank you.